Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. Today, we're just going to get right into it. So, my guest today is Jenn O'Donnell. She is a localization director at a video game company in Osaka. Awesome job. She does Japanese to English translations. She is just a really interesting person that has a lot of really great information about Japanese to English translation in general, and learning Japanese. And she compiles all that information in a lot of really great content that she produces. So she has a couple of different websites. One is Jenn Translations, J-N-E-N Translations. That is about translating Japanese to English translation. She writes a bunch of stuff for that. And she also writes for another website that she runs, jtalkonline.com. That's where she writes about learning Japanese. Tons of great stuff over there. She also produces 2 podcasts, and one of them is called Translation Chat. In that one, she interviews people that have some connection to translation, and they talk about their favorite Japanese to English translations. Really interesting concept. Great stuff there. If you learn Japanese, if you are interested in translation, if you consume Japanese media, I think if you fall under any of those categories, you'll probably find this podcast pretty interesting. Go check it out. Link in the show notes, of course. And she also produces another podcast called Otafu Susume. The English title would be Recommendations for My Otaku Spouse. And in that one, her and her spouse recommend/talk about their favorite anime and manga and media. That's another really fun one. There's over 50 episodes of that one, so tons of content for you to check out. Tons of articles for you to read. All those links are going to be in the show notes. But for now, what we're going to do is jump into the conversation with Jenn O'Donnell.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
I believe you're in Osaka, unless that's out-of-date information?
Nope, I am in Osaka.
Awesome. Okay. So I did live in that area for a few years, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, did you? Whereabouts?
So, well, in Osaka, I lived in Hirakata City, because that was for a study abroad program.
Kansai Gaidai?
Yep, that's
I also went to Kansai Gaidai.
Yeah. You also went?
Yeah, I went to Kansai Gaidai.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. So I was there for a year, 2 semesters. And then I was able to go back to Kansai area a couple years afterwards on the JET program. And I was in Osaka for, not Osaka, Kobe for 3 years.
Nice.
Yeah. So I enjoy that area, and I've spent quite a bit of time there.
Yeah,
and,
it's a really nice area. What year were you at Kansai Gaidai for?
So I was there 2007, 2008.
Oh,
so
okay.
I believe I'm a bit older than you.
Yeah, you're my senpai.
Yes. Yeah. But no, I love that program, and it was like, how can I put it? That was a very important time for me, because that was when I was in Florida, in Miami, Florida. And that was where I was living at the time. And there's pretty much nobody that I can practice Japanese with. And so when I decided to study Japanese, I got very serious about it. I had to, make sure that I was at a certain level. I wanted to be there at a certain level before I left and got on the plane and went to Osaka. And that was a really big motivator. And there I was able to make like so many friends and really like start using the language and get me to the next level. So yeah, fond memories. So what took you back to Osaka then? Was it like job stuff, or how did you end up back there?
Yeah, job stuff. I was working for a video game company in Fukuoka. And then I decided it was time to move on and applied for a video game company in Osaka and got the job, and then we moved up here.
Nice.
That was
okay.
a year and a half ago.
Oh, okay.
It feels like I've been here for a lot longer though.
So then how long were you in Fukuoka before then?
Before that, I was in Fukuoka for about almost 2 years, like a year and 11 months.
Okay. Before the pandemic, I was going to Fukuoka like every summer, like 3 years in a row. Yeah. So I've spent maybe all in all like a couple months in Fukuoka probably. Another nice place. Okay, so let's
It's a small world.
Yeah. Well, two reasonably, two of the biggest cities in Japan, I guess you would say. So, okay. What area of Fukuoka were you in?
I was in Fukuoka City. I was living right next to the zoo, actually.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, I've spent most of my time there too. But anyway, it's like let's stop name dropping places. So
okay.
So how did you get into the Japanese language? How did you get drawn into that?
It's a bit of a complicated question. A friend of mine, or rather somebody I wanted to be friends with, was studying Japanese when I was in college. And in the UK, college is high school. So you go to college from 16 to 18. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I want to study Japanese. Can you introduce me to your teacher? And she did. And we ended up becoming friends because of Japanese. And I studied Japanese for 2 years with this private teacher. Mm. And then in the UK, you tend to do gap years. Mm-hmm. Where at the end of your college, at the age of 18, you can take a break between college and university and go, like, people work, or they go traveling, or they do volunteering. And so the two of us went to Japan, to Fukuoka Prefecture, to Fukuoka City, to study for a month at a school that provided sort of a language program for farming. And then we volunteered on farms for a few months, and then went back to the language school to study some more Japanese. And so it was kind of that whole experience, those 2 years, that really made me fall in love with the language and the culture, because I had never really, I'd started a lot of hobbies beforehand. I'd started like piano and violin and karate and kung fu, and I always dropped them after about 2 months. Mm-hmm. Like, I never really went anywhere with them, but Japanese was the first hobby where I was doing it on a regular basis. I was paying for my own lessons. So I had a part-time job as well. And so I had sort of a sense of responsibility for it as well. And then the experience of going to Japan and using the language and meeting people and going on this adventure was just so amazing. And I absolutely fell in love with the culture and the language and the country and the people and just everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've been through something like that with like guitar and ukulele, and like I'll take it on. Doesn't last. But Japanese, I'm still at it 20 years later or whatever, more than 20 years at this point. But I still, like, I don't actively study, but I'm learning. I'm watching news. I use it. I get to read it and speak it and hear it. And when I find something new, I always enjoy it, and I share it on the podcast and things like that. So it's still something that I don't know. I'll probably be doing it for the rest of my life. So
yeah.
So what did they have you doing on the farm in Fukuoka?
So we actually went on 2 farms. The first one was a strawberry farm.
Oh, okay.
And I'm still actually in contact with the family, even though that was probably 15 years ago now. And so the volunteering program is WOOF, Worldwide Organization for Organic Farms. Okay. And so it's like a big exchange program. You can go to pretty much any country in the world where you volunteer on organic farms. And
is the mascot a dog, by the way?
It's not. It should be, but it's not.
A little farmer dog. Sorry.
It really should be. Yeah. But yeah, so on the strawberry farm, we were like weeding the strawberries and picking off the runners just generally helping out. And then the second farm we went to was a duck farm where we were helping to like pick up the eggs for the ducks and just it was just a very interesting experience. One was in Fukuoka Prefecture. The other was actually in Oita Prefecture, sort of near Mount Aso, where there was a lot of volcanic activity. And so we'd also go for hikes in the volcanoes, like in the mountains and stuff. And it was just it was amazing. It was such good fun. And it really forces you to learn, like, to use your Japanese and to learn it, because no one speaks English in the middle of nowhere. And so you're like, how do I say this?
So whether it's like a martial arts class or when you're doing something really specific, you learn a very specific vocabulary set. Mm-hmm. And I imagine, you're learning things like pick up and, I don't know, take it over there and things like that. Like, was it very practical stuff that you first got familiar with it?
I really don't remember how I was able to communicate, because my Japanese was awful. Even after, so I studied for 2 years before doing this with my friend, but I only studied 1 hour a week, and I was a terrible student because I never did my homework and I never studied outside of the 1 hour a week. And I found out many years later that I'm also dyslexic, which made learning very slow and very difficult. I'm honestly surprised I kept it up for that long. Yeah. But by the time I went to Japan, I was probably still only just learning hiragana and katakana, and I was probably still only N5 level Japanese. But, slow and steady wins the race. Yep. So I honestly don't know how I managed to communicate, but sort of the vocabulary that we would have learned in the school probably would have been things like, pick. I remember actually one moment when our host family was like, kyuke desu. I was like, I don't know what this kyuke is. And she was like, break it. So it's break, like come have some tea and snacks. And I was like, oh, okay. So now I've learned this new word. And so it wasn't just things related to farming, but also just daily life. Right. Japanese.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, that's some of the most memorable stuff, right?
It is.
When you have that link to a specific moment. I mean, you probably don't even remember like what you did during that break, but that image of like you figuring that out is still in your head.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's weird what sticks with you after all this time.
Yeah. No, I have those moments too sometimes. I go like, oh yeah, I remember when I learned this word. Like, it's so weird. So, okay. Well, you brought something up that I was a bit curious about, and that you were dyslexic learning Japanese, and that sounds like its own unique experience. I have my own experience being legally blind learning Japanese, where like it's almost like I can read kanji and I do, but like just walking around, like for example in Japan, like knowing kanji is practically zero help to me because I can't even see it anyway. Like I can't see the street signs, I can't see the restaurant signs. It doesn't matter that I know or do not know the kanji. So I for me, like I had to kind of do things a certain different way to make sure that I still learn that, a lot of magnification and doing things on the computer more than whatever, and focusing a little bit more on speech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what about yourself? Like, I know you said you didn't figure this out or you didn't really know this until later in life, but did you end up like figuring out your own strategies to learn Japanese in a way that was productive for you?
Yeah, eventually after a lot of trial and error, I actually started up the website Japanese Talk Online because I wanted to be like, hey, don't make the same mistakes I did. And that was even before I found out I was dyslexic. So a lot of the strategies that I found worked for me personally was very visual techniques, like writing things out and sticking them to the wall. If I have a problem memorizing a word, I'll use mnemonics, which is sort of the whole Heisig's Remembering the Kanji book is all about mnemonics, even though I never used that book. And so creating stories and imagery for myself to try and remember specific words, and just bashing my head against the same grammar over and over again. A lot of sort of consciously sitting down and thinking, why did I get this wrong? What am I confusing it with? And then focusing on the differences so that next time if I come across it, I can be like, oh no, wait, this is this reading and this word, and it's different from this one that I keep confusing it with. And so it's a lot of purposeful, slow, strategic studying, which can be really difficult because it's boring. Yeah.
I mean, it can be boring as it is, but okay. So for someone that doesn't know that much about dyslexia, like my first impression is, like the classic sort of thing that you see is, you hear about letters being switched and things like that in English. And, perhaps something similar happens like that with the Japanese writing system. But you also mentioned something about grammar. So does that influence the way that you like kind of see it or interpret certain like grammar structures or something like that?
Yeah, grammar was always the hardest thing because it's so abstract. And because it doesn't have a clear connection to a concrete meaning or a concrete situation, that tended to fall out of my memory a lot faster than other things. Yeah, especially at first particles. I still get particles mixed up. I think everybody does.
Yeah, it still happens. Yeah.
But yeah, the more obscure, the more vague a grammar is, the more different situations a grammar can be used in, the harder it is for me to grasp. Whereas if I have actually advanced grammar is easier because it's often you only use it in this situation with these words in this context. So that's easier because I can say, okay, it's only used here.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So, I know you went on to do a master's in translation as well, right?
Yes. So that's when I found out I was dyslexic.
In the middle of that?
In the middle of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you got pretty far given the circumstances.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that must have been a weight off your shoulders in a sense, at least. Like, it gives you some like direction or some kind of light.
Yeah, it explained a lot, but at the same time, it was like,
now
crap, what do I do now? Because I'm in the middle of this master's program. Do I carry on with translation knowing I have this problem with linguistics, or do I push through and do it anyway because I've come this far? Yeah.
Okay, well, so I mean, I think you made it through, right?
I did. Yeah, I kept going. Okay. I'm too stubborn to quit.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things. Like, if you made it that far, it's like, okay, I guess I'll push a little harder and make it to the end. So at what point did you think like, all right, translation is something I want to get serious about. This is like the kind of path that I want to take.
Honestly, just before, literally the day before I applied for my master's program was when I decided to take it seriously.
So what were you just kind of thinking you weren't sure what you wanted to do until then, or what?
No, I knew I needed a plan because I haven't an older sister. I have a younger sister as well, but I saw my older sister. She left university and she struggled to find what she wanted to do, and so I was like, I'm not going to do that. When I leave university, I'm going to know exactly what I want to do. I'm going to have a plan in place, and I'm going to do it. And so my plan was to, after university, pass the N1 exam and to get a job at a Japanese company where I could use my Japanese and my English in a business environment. And that was the plan. I didn't want to be a translator. I had no interest in translation because I didn't think my English was good enough. Or just I didn't think it was a skill that I had or something I could do. I just knew that I had the Japanese skill, which is a lot more marketable than my undergraduate degree, which is anthropology. And so I was like, okay, this is my plan. This is what I'm going to do. And so I left university and I went back to Fukuoka to study at a language school and passed the N2 exam.
Oh, okay.
And I got a job at an American company who made systems diagnostic tools for vehicles. And one of their main clients is this big Japanese car company. And so they were looking for somebody to kind of liaison with them. And when I got to America, they said, actually, we need somebody to open up an office in Japan, not just work in Japan for us. And I was like, okay. But then while working with them, I realized I still had to do translation. I was doing these technical documents for them that took forever because I didn't know the terminology. I didn't know the specific technical terms in English or Japanese.
Yeah.
And no one was really helping me. And I was also trying to set up this company in Japan, but they didn't really know what to do with me, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I spent a year still floundering about with this car company. And then, and so I was like, crap, this is what I thought I wanted, but I guess maybe it's actually not what I wanted. And then I got a message on LinkedIn from somebody from Yen Press, who's a publishing company, who were like, we're looking for translators. Would you be interested in taking out a translation test? And I tried it and I failed horribly because I'd never again done translation before, let alone creative translation. But like put the idea in my head, actually, maybe I could do this instead. And so I talked to the company I was working for and I was like, I'm going to take a master's degree. And they were like, oh yeah, sure. That's fine. Like we didn't really get anywhere with this whole opening an office in Japan thing. It's not the end of the world. They were really cool about it. And so I ended up leaving and doing my master's in the theory and practice of translation. And that didn't really help with my translation skills either. What I was honestly expecting was, because it's actually from a very prestigious school called the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Okay. SOAS. And so it has a very good reputation. I thought, a really good reputational, like a reputable university must have a great linguistics and translation program. They'll teach me how to translate and then I can become a translator. But when I actually got into the program, it was literally what it said, the theory and practice. So we learnt the theory of translation from an academic standpoint and we practiced some translation, but they never taught us how to actually translate or how to apply the theory to the practice. And so we didn't get any feedback on the translations that we were doing. No guidance on how to like freelance or like turn it into a career. So it wasn't really a vocational degree. It was a degree for academics who are interested in linguistics. But I'm pretty sure 95% of the people that took that program wanted to actually become translators, not just academics. And so it was very frustrating when I finished my degree because I was like, I have this master's degree, but I still don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to market myself as a freelancer or how to, get a job or how to, obviously my translation was better than my translation skills were better than they were before I started, but I still didn't understand where I was making mistakes. And what people were after. And so I had a lot of self-doubt. And so my year after I graduated was spent researching how to be a freelance translator. And so basically I taught myself all the things that I wanted to learn from the degree. Okay. So
well, at least you have a nice fancy name on your resume.
I have a nice fancy name, and I guess that's all you need sometimes is to.
It does help. Doesn't
it
hurt.
Helps. It's a really expensive door opener, but
that's the thing. Yeah. And it is 2 years at least, I assume.
In the UK, it's a year long. It's a year. Masters are only a year, which is really nice.
At least that's better.
It's better, yeah.
Okay, so then how did you actually get in the door and start doing translations?
Trial and error. Honestly, It was, as I said, I didn't really know what I was doing when I graduated. And so I was studying a lot of how to market myself, how to, the book, How to Succeed as a Freelance Translator was really useful, and doing various online courses on freelancing and marketing myself. And then with that, I then applied to found companies to then do their translation tests. I probably took hundreds of translation tests. And I think, looking back, actually, I think I passed about 25% of them and then got work from about 10% of the places that I was applying to. And so it was really a matter of just keep sending applications and doing translation tests for companies and eventually getting opportunities. And of course, my first ones were always, the first jobs that I ever did were really low paying, grueling, terrible jobs that no person should do because they're very exploitive practices. things like I translated an otome game for a mobile company and they paid 0.5 yen a character. So it's like 0.5 cents
Yeah.
a character. And
Yeah.
it was like, oh, that's like, I've never seen a rate that low before. But I didn't know any better because I was a beginner. I was inexperienced.
Right.
I didn't know what I was doing. And I was like, oh, I've got this opportunity. I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. Huh. So, okay. So then nowadays is your primary focus game translations?
Yes.
Okay. Is that, I mean, I know you can't speak specifics, but like what kind of platforms are we talking about? Like mobile games or,
I mostly work on console games.
console games? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So when I was freelancing, I was working a lot on manga and anime and light novels. And then I needed some stability. And so I looked for a job working in-house, and all the translation positions in-house are for game companies.
Okay.
But I'm not just a translator, because a lot of game companies hire freelance translators. And so my job is sort of a mixture between translator and project manager as a localization director.
Oh, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many people would love to have that job. Okay, so then, what you mentioned in a tweet that I saw, and unfortunately, I did not get to see the lecture. I don't know if it's online, but you mentioned something about a lecture you gave that was about pitfalls in media translation and how to avoid them. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. What are some things that you see some kind of problems and I guess how to avoid them? I mean, obviously don't give us the whole thing, but just maybe a couple highlights that people might find interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking of actually writing this up as an article for my website, because it is useful to know. It's a lot of the things I do for my site are things I've learned along the way to try and help other people not make the same mistakes I did, to help give them guidance where I never had any. And so persistent pitfalls in media translation and how to avoid them was a talk all about common mistakes that I see all the time in media translation, especially among aspiring translators. But I've also seen these same issues come up with experienced translators. And so it's kind of to spread awareness. It's mostly sort of two levels of traps you can fall into, or on the word level, the lexical level, and the sentence level, the syntax. And the word level being things like falling for false friends. Do you know the term false friends?
I'm assuming that it's something like you're like a literal translation versus a figurative translation. You're like a katakana word that sounds like an English word. You go for like the one-to-one, but it's actually not. Something along those lines.
Yeah,
okay.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Words like tension, or I guess in Japanese, tension, and challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's so easy to be like, oh, this person has high tension.
Yeah.
What does that mean in English?
I mean, at best that means like hypertension, but
yes,
high blood pressure, but no.
Or like if a scene has a high tension, it means like, it's like a thriller almost.
Yeah. Like, or it's like tense. You could tense, you could do it that way. But again, that's still high tension and tense, like two different interpretations.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. But tension in Japanese actually means like energy or excitement.
Right.
And so it's like, it's really easy to fall for those katakana words, the waseigo, without realizing it. And so being aware of what they actually mean and sort of how to find out the real meaning of them, as opposed to, because often the dictionary will say, oh, tension means tension. And you're like, no, ignore the dictionary. The dictionary is wrong.
Yeah.
Or other things I mentioned were things like denotation versus connotation. So the denotation being the dictionary definition of the word, whereas the connotation is people's interpretation of the word, which might not be in the dictionary. And so being aware of things like that, like the word heya in Japanese is defined as room, but in Japanese people also use it to refer to their apartment or, their flat. And so being aware of things like that means you don't accidentally translate the word apartment as room.
Yeah.
Like they live in a 3-bedroom room. It's like, no, that's not quite, there's something odd about that.
Yeah. It's and we go back to that classic things like, but I know some Japanese and I can tell that person in the anime
that's not what they said.
That's not what they said. That's not what they said. It's like, well, you don't know enough Japanese to know that is actually,
what they said.
Yeah, that is exactly that. The English subtitle that was localized, is actually what they meant to say if you go to the idea rather than the word that they used.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, because the words that we use are language is interpretation of the things in our brains, our thoughts, our own interpretations of the world. And so different cultures have different ways of expressing that understanding of the world in different language. And so you can't, it's impossible to have a one-to-one because every individual and has a different interpretation of the world, and how we express that is incredibly different in different languages.
Yeah. Like words are like arrows to ideas, and different words have different kinds of arrows pointing in different ways to different ideas in different languages. And like your job, or the job of localizers and people trying to capture those ideas is to not just do the literal translation, but to try to find the counterparts that are pointing to the similar kind of ideas that give us the same kinds of inner feelings, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So as translators, we're not just, as you said, translating the words. We're trying to
anybody can with the dictionary. You just get the dictionary.
Yes.
You want to do that? Go ahead and do that. Anybody can do that, right?
Yeah. But even then, that's incredibly difficult. Like you're giving yourself more work by trying to match every single word, as opposed to conveying the overall meaning. And translators convey the overall meaning and the overall story. Like we're telling the same story here. It's just presented in a way that is more natural to native English speakers, so that they get the same experience that a Japanese person would when they engage in the media that they're consuming. Or at least as close as possible, because again, we experience things in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, especially things like cultural references, pop cultural references, you just have to localize them in a different way, because you're not going to get the joke about some Japanese celebrity from 1995 or something.
Yes.
Like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So in one of your podcasts, is it called the Translation Podcast? Is that
Translation Chat?
Translation Chat. Okay. So I know in that one, you ask people that are either translators themselves or somehow involved with translation or have an appreciation for translation about their favorite translations. Can you give me any examples of some translations that you particularly enjoy? Could be recent, could be classics, whatever you can think of.
Yeah. I have a couple of translation reviews on my website, just out of personal interest. One I really love is the Miracles at the Namiya General Store, which was translated by Sam Bet, written in Japanese by Higashino. Oh, I forgot his first name. It's like super famous.
I think I might. You're ringing some bells, but I can't think of the first name.
Keigo Higashino.
That sounds very familiar. Okay, yeah.
I think I'm pretty sure that's his name. And just, I thought Sam Bet did a fantastic job breaking down. So the story is sort of slightly time travel sci-fi, where a whole bunch of different storylines are interweaving with each other. And I think there are probably about 6 or 7 different narrators. So you have chunks of the story that are told from different perspectives. You have a whole cast of different characters. And I thought Sam just did a great job capturing the kind of the voices of each character. And especially because there was one part where I remember reading where you have a couple of thugs who have just stolen something and they're hiding out in the store, and they write a letter. And I remember the English was something like, they wrote everything out everything was in lowercase, and there were a couple of spelling mistakes. And I was like, lowercase, that's interesting. I wonder if in Japanese it was all hiragana.
Right.
And I looked at the Japanese, I was like, yeah, that's actually how he handled that. The letter in Japanese was written in hiragana without any kanji, or with like 2 kanji. Mm-hmm. Whereas in English, he said, oh, everything was written out in lowercase, which gives you the same impression that hiragana gives you, but obviously conveys that in English without having to explain. They wrote it out in hiragana, which is the Japanese script, and implies da-da-da-da-da. Like, that wouldn't work in a novel because it would take you completely out of the narrative. And so I think that was handled really, really well.
Am I right in kind of assuming that the aim was to kind of convey a sort of like uneducatedness and almost kind of like childishness? Okay, yeah, because that's one way you could interpret like an inability to use kanji and, you know, having to only resort to hiragana. Go back to Dr. Wes Robertson. He was on the show before. That was like 6-7 episodes ago, maybe. But yeah, we talk all about that. But that's really interesting how you can convey something else by lowercase, right? Even though it's you're getting that same kind of idea across with a totally different writing system, right? You don't have kanji in English, but yet they found a way to do that.
Yeah, I thought it was so well done.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool. Anything else you can think of? Any other good ones?
One I recently fell in love with before was the novel All You Need Is Kill.
That was the one that was made into the movie with Tom Cruise, right?
Yes, made into the movie with Tom Cruise. The original novel is actually surprisingly good. I really enjoyed it. They have different takes. I think the movie is a little more hopeful than the novel is.
Okay.
But All You Need to Kill by Hiroshi Sakurazaka and translated by Alexandra Smith and Joseph Reader. That's it, yes. Joseph Reader. And the two of them, Joseph Reader and Alexandra Smith, they've worked for Square Enix for several years, and now they kind of work together. And they also do their own thing, I think, more now, but they've worked together a lot in the past, both translating and editing together. So it's a very collaborative work, which I think always creates really, really great translations. When you have an editor and a translator who work so closely together. Yeah. And just the way... So Alexander A. Smith actually came up like 3 times in my translation chat podcast because he is such an amazing translator. And the way he handled All You Need to Kill is so good because he just writes so fluently and creates this amazing imagery in your mind that really conveys the original feel and the original story without directly translating. So I quickly brought up a review that I wrote on my site about this book, and the first sentence is, when the bullets start flying, it's only a matter of time before fear catches up with the soldier. There you are, steel death whizzing past in the air. Like, it's just, the imagery is so good. And he takes the original meaning and the imagery of the Japanese and just is able to convey it in English so beautifully. And I am infinitely jealous of his skills. And I really want to be able to translate like this.
No, it's an art. I mean, like there's an infinite way of translating anything.
There really is. And it really is an art.
Like, One in my master's program, I remember for some reason this came up. I don't remember why exactly it came up, but there's a famous novel called Yukiguni, Snow Country, I believe is the English translation title. And the first sentence is something like "Toneru o nukeru to Yukiguni datta," something like that, right? And so that I mean, a literal translation is something like, when you pass through on the other, how can I see, even right now I'm struggling. Like, once you're outside of the tunnel, once you've passed through the tunnel, there's a snow country. And I'm going very literal here, but that's such a shitty translation that I just did, right? But because in Japanese, it's such a like punchy, like full of imagery and short, and you get you get everything right there. Just that conditional, the to right there. It's like once you're out of the tunnel, bam, you're hit with the Yukiguni, like the snow country, right? But then how do you convey that in that same sort of way in English? And that is what, makes a good translation, right? Somebody that can do that that can get that same kind of power across in a comparable way. That's a good job, right?
Yeah. And the first sentence of a novel is always really important because that's the first thing the reader's going to read, and it needs to catch them and draw them into the story. Otherwise, they're going to put it down and not bother. Yeah.
And then, tonero nukeru. You don't even know what you're talking about. Like, you don't know if it's a train, which it is a train, I believe. You don't know if somebody's walking through the tunnel, like
or in a car,
or a car, or a spaceship. Like, you don't know what the heck it is, right? But in English, you have to find some way. I guess you do have to add a subject, perhaps, but it can be really, really tricky. Yeah. Or another, like, Attack on Titan, Shingeki no Kyojin, that title, oh my god, like, I won't get into any spoilers, but you don't really find out the true meaning of that title until, like, towards the end,
really?
Years after it started, right? So, Attack on Titan, looking back on it, is not really, like, a good title, but the person doing the translation at the time, they had no idea that this was going to be something else, like, 5, 6, 7 years later. So it's a really tough thing.
It really is. Like, I think novel translation in a way is easier because you have the complete story.
Yes.
And so you can tie it up. But light novels, which are serialized over possibly like tens of books, and manga and anime, when you're translating them before they've even come out, as you said, if the author has something planned, they're not going to tell anybody about that. So the translator often has to make a guess. And sometimes you can accidentally translate yourself into a corner that you then have to try and work out how to deal with later on because it doesn't mean the thing that you think it meant.
Yep. And it's absolutely thankless, right?
Yes.
How could you?
You ruined my story.
Yeah, it's like, I did this 7 years ago. I didn't know this was going to happen. Like, nobody knew. So I think last I checked, there were 10 episodes of Translation Chat out now, right? And are you doing that on a regular schedule, or what's your plan for that?
No, I'd only planned to do 10 episodes originally.
Okay.
And so that was kind of my season 1, but it went so well, and I had so many people interested in taking part that I actually have another 10 guests lined up.
Awesome.
So I'm going to record those in between March and May, and then hopefully release them around the middle of the year, probably in the summer, depending on how busy I get with work.
Sure. Yeah,
because it's all I'm doing in my free time because I'm a masochist and I love translation as a hobby.
Yeah. Well, you're talking to another person here that produces at least 2 podcasts. Sometimes I'm producing like 4 podcasts at a time. So,
yikes.
So I'll put a link for that. Check it out. It's fun. I've listened to 3 or 4 episodes. I'm a language nerd too, so I enjoy that. But you do one other podcast, like I mentioned. Could you tell us a little bit about that one?
So the other podcast I do is called Recommendations for My Otaku Spouse. Or Otafu Susume. Otafu being otaku mixed with fufu, so otafu, and Susume being recommendation.
It's a very light novel-y kind of title.
It's a very light novel-y title, yeah. It's honestly, it's just a bit of fun that me and my spouse do. We have some friends in America who do podcasting, and so like the group of us do kind of different podcasts about Japanese media. And so my spouse and I decided to do this Recommendations for My Otaku Spouse in order to kind of force each other to read or watch or play the things that we've been recommending to each other for years and never got around to it. And so we started this as a bit of fun, and we enjoyed it so much that we just kept going. And I don't expect anyone to listen to it. It's mostly for the 2 of us to just kind of have an excuse to watch things and then talk about them. And because we really love talking about this stuff. And we normally have these conversations anyway, just for recording them and sticking them online for anybody who might be interested in. So it's honestly a lot more tongue-in-cheek. It's a lot more flirty between the 2 of us when it's not serious at all. it's just a bit of fun.
So what are your tastes versus his tastes?
We have very similar tastes.
Okay.
But we have interests in very different things. So he's more interested in sort of romance and giant robot stuff. And I'm more interested in fantasy and action. And so, but whenever we're watching something, we tend to have the same takeaways. Sometimes we have different interpretations of media, but we tend to agree a lot on some of the points that we discuss. We recently watched The Wheel of Time, Amazon adaptation, and neither of us really liked it.
I'm not familiar with that at all. Okay. Is that originally a manga or something? Or
the Wheel of Time was originally an epic fantasy series written in English, and the Amazon TV series is like a Western drama adaptation.
Oh, okay.
So it's not just anime. We do talk about anime, but we also talk about Western media as well.
Okay.
Because we're interested in literally everything. And
Gotcha.
so we ranted about that. And we had very similar takeaways in that the show didn't quite deliver on what it was promising. And the pacing was all over the place. And so we were pretty critical of its story and how it was adapted into visual media.
Gotcha. Anything that you particularly enjoyed lately?
Yes. Which actually we'll probably record pretty soon. Do you know The Faraway Paladin?
No.
Sai Hatte no Paladin. It's a light novel.
Is that a new series?
It's relatively new.
Okay.
I think the anime came out at the end of last year.
Okay.
Beginning of this year. I read the first volume of the light novel and we watched the first few episodes of the anime. And I really like the light novel, which is a surprise because I don't normally like light novels. But I think this was a really strong light novel because it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, whereas light novels tend to not, because they like
kind of go on and on.
They just go on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend picking up the light novel for that if anyone is looking for something to read.
Okay. Is that like an isekai kind of thing or what?
Yes,
Okay.
it's an isekai. A kid gets reborn in another world, but he has his memories from his past life, and so he's actually brought up by 3 undead beings in a city with nobody else, and he has these memories from his past life, and he swears, because in his past life he was a hikikomori, he didn't go out, he didn't do anything, and he swears that he will, live a fulfilling life in this world.
Oh, okay.
And so it's sort of the mystery behind why is these 3 undead people bringing him up? Where did he come from? Like, where is he going to go with this? And it was actually really, really good.
Okay. All right. I'm always happy to check something new out, especially there's a whole lot of isekai, and you really have to there's a lot you got to get through to find the good ones.
Yes. And a lot of people really, really like isekai. And so it's, different people's different tastes. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they're ridiculously popular and why there is a never ending stream of isekai light novels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can't even keep up. Like the only thing that I would check out is if I got a personal recommendation like this. It's like, okay, I'll give it a shot. It's like, otherwise I don't have time to go through like 10 of them to find the one that I really like.
Yep.
All right. So I will put a link to your podcast, your website, all that stuff. Plenty of links for everybody that wants to find out more about translation and Jenn's recommendations and all that stuff, and Twitter and all that. So, Jenn, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. Sorry, I think I've rambled a lot, but yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. Again, thank you so much to Jenn. This was a really, really fun conversation for me. I got to talk about the Japanese language and translation and anime, so all stuff that I absolutely love. So if you want to check out more of Jenn's stuff, if you want to listen to her podcasts, read her articles, there will be links in the show notes for Translation Chat, Otafu Susume, jtalkonline.com, Jenn Translations, all that stuff, articles in the show notes. For the full version of the show notes, you can also go over to japanstationpodcast.com. I know some podcast apps don't do so well with like embedded links and stuff like that. So if your podcast app doesn't like my show notes, you can go check out japanstationpodcast.com. That's the full blog. It's actually part of japankyo.com. That's just a redirect URL, but you can go there and all the episodes are there. You can just click on the links, embedded videos, all that stuff. In this case, there's no video, but when there is, I embed them in the blog post and not in the show notes. But that's needless information probably. So again, japanstationpodcast.com. If you have any questions or comments, send them over to mail@japanstationpodcast.com. Remember to follow on Facebook and Twitter @Japankyo News. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. It really seems like in the past few months, there's been quite a surge in listeners. I'm consistently getting higher numbers for every episode. So thank you to everybody who has been subscribing and sticking around and listening to the episodes. I really, really appreciate it. If you want to go the extra mile, and I would really, really appreciate this, please leave a review in Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. I know Apple Podcast still controls much of the overall podcasting listenership, I guess you would say. Most people still do use Apple Podcasts. So a review there certainly is helpful, and I would really, really appreciate it. By the way, if you're doing any shopping on Amazon, make sure to use the Amazon affiliate link, japankyo.com/Amazon. That will support the show and it won't cost you anything extra. Thank you so much to Unobi for providing the opening and closing song. More information in the show notes. And that does it for this episode. Next one should be out on March 15th. And I won't say what it is, but it may involve a shark attack, maybe. We'll see. I will be doing that interview very soon, in a day or two from the time of this recording. By the way, the new episode of Ichimon Japan is out, and the new episode actually is kind of a bonus episode because lately I've only been releasing one a month, but I released a second mini episode in February, on February 21st, because it was a follow-up to the previous episode, which was all about katakana words we quote-unquote hate. So we actually talk about why Argentina is Argentine in Japanese in that mini follow-up episode. So go check that out if you haven't already. It's short, but I actually learned something that I didn't know about Argentina when I happened to stumble across some information. And so I thought that was worth putting out as its own little episode. So if you're curious about that, go check that out. Go check out Ichimon Japan, japankyo.com/Ichimon Japan, or you can just look us up on whatever podcast app you use. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, go find your miniature pony.
Just do it!